Hello, my friends. Hello, hello. How are you? Thank you for stopping by and thanks for joining me today. This is the Outstanding Life Show. If you're new here, we talk about recovery, we talk about addiction, we talk about mindfulness, and we come at the conversation from an approach of there's a lot of stigmatism out there when it comes to mental health and addiction. And my hope with this show is to help alleviate that anxiety, that frustration, that conflict where there's a little adversity and there's more than one way to approach that conversation. And it's a sensitive topic. For me, it was a real challenge in my early stages of recovery. I'm at a point now where I've reached 8 years of sobriety. I'm about 8 years in a couple of weeks, but it's been really challenging. And I remember how difficult it was. And my hope by getting this conversation out there is to add more to the conversation by starting more conversations and to invite you, my audience, to join, to invite you to add, to share your thoughts, and to introduce a new perspective. This show is not really meant to persuade you to not do something, and this show certainly isn't here to convince you not to do something or to do something. This show, this podcast, this live video, these blog posts are here for those who have already made the decision that what they want is they want to live an outstanding life. And this show is a tool in that skill set. It's in the tool belt. It's in your artillery where there's a support and there's a community and there's other people out there who are thinking similar things, who are eager to have certain conversations, and we don't shy away from those difficult talks. So when we think about the Outstanding Life Show, we think about mindfulness, we think about recovery, and we think about inclusion. So today, my friends, we are talking about something that's come up over the past couple of weeks as we fired up this show in 2020, the craziness that is 2020. We've mentioned it before. It's the topic of triggers. Now, if you're not sure what triggers can be, I want to separate triggers for a minute away from triggering. Like, what is something that is a trigger and what is triggering? So if I look at what is a trigger, in the raw definition, it's something that would set you off. It's something that, if you were to classify it, what would set you to go from 0 to 60 miles per hour? What would that be? Would that be like a spider that falls on your shoulder? Would it be some spilled milk that falls on the counter? Is it your roommate ate the last piece of bread or took the last pizza? You know what I mean? Like, certain things can be triggering, and the same triggers for you may not be the same triggers for me. So when I talk about triggers, it's an event crisis point where there's an opportunity there, but there's a knee-jerk reaction. And in that trigger moment, when that event takes place, going 0 to 60 is the example I just shared. But for some, it might be 0 to 20, like in a normal person's experience. They might go 0 to 10 when they have a triggering experience. But then there's some where, let's say I don't know, I'm going to pick something universal where, let's say you stub your toe. Right away, you're in a moment of response and you're hopping around on one foot and you're saying ow and you're shaking your foot. Like, you're not going 0 to 60 in that example. But that would be an example of something triggering, where that is like the raw nerve, where as soon as anything touches it, boom, the rest of the sandcastle falls apart. The rest of the house of cards collapses. And so something that can be triggering is like the root, if you will, or the nerve. And the triggers would be the event crisis point. Now, when I dig further, like the layer, one layer deeper would be, let's say you have, you injured your arm, and that arm needed bandages, and you got your bandage on there. And then let's say you've got your medication, you got your bandage, and with it being fully healed, or not completely healed, with it being fully wrapped up and it's got its bandages on, and you went to the doctor and you got all those check boxes taken care of, and with it being fully wrapped up, let's say you and me were hanging out, we're wearing a masks or what have you, but then I accidentally come up to you and I brush up against that bandage. And if you had that bandage on and it was fully taken care of and it was well ointmented, if it was well treated, you might have a little bump, but it may not actually hurt. It may not really push you to the limits. It may not be triggering. But now let's take into a different aspect where, let's say you had that same injured arm, but let's also say you did not get that treated. You did not get that looked after. In fact, rather than getting it looked after, you got it more, you got dirt in there, or there's like scrapes, and then there's oils, and maybe there's, I don't know, like gross things happening on that wound. And it's really festered into a wound. It started out as something that happened, and now because you didn't look after it, it's now evolved into something much more detrimental. And now let's say it's an open wound and we're hanging out and we're still wearing our masks. And now let's say I come up to you, and with that open wound that's on your arm, I don't even need to come up to you and brush up against you. It could be something as simple as a little tiny cat hair falls on your arm, and if it's an open wound, that's really, really gonna hurt. That's really gonna go, and I'm just picturing it right now. If you're watching the video, you can see my shoulders scrunch up and my voice is getting all scrunchy. But that's because I'm just imagining what that feeling would be like, where I would have this open wound on my arm and I put a cat hair on it. That's going to really set me off. That's going to be triggering. So when I look at it from a recovery standpoint, when I look at it from an addiction mindset, if I'm not looking after myself, if I'm not taking care of my needs, if I'm not looking out for my mental health, if I'm not looking out for that, in a previous episode, we talked about hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. If I'm not looking after my needs on the core level, and I'm self-medicating and I'm not taking care of, I don't want to say the bare essentials of life, but if I'm depriving my life of what a normal human being would need, it's just like that wound where it's going to fester. It's just like that wound where it just goes and it de-evolves, like it just falls apart. And it, now let's say I'm in a relationship, in that relationship we have an argument, and let's say I'm also that open wound. It's not going to take much for me to go 0 to 60. This is an event where the trigger takes place, and what's triggering is, I don't want to blame it on the relationship, because the relationship in my example I just gave isn't the problem. It's the open wound that I've left untreated. It's that sore, I almost want to call it a spiritual void, where I've tried to self-medicate and solve this need with other means, and I've not been successful. And it's gotten to the point now where it's this festering wound, and it's erupting into this relationship that's unfair and it's unjust, and I'm taking it out on this other person. So when I talk about triggers and triggering, the triggering is the point where that little cat hair that falls on the open wound, and the trigger would be the event that takes place. There's also that culpableness, there's that willfulness that I've started long beforehand. So long before the cat hair fell on, I made the decision to not look after that wound, and I made the decision to put more effort and burn lean fuel into the night and focus on something else rather than looking after me. So when I look at the next part, where here's where a single matchstick can cause a raging fire. And I heard this example when I was in rehab, and the example they gave was, Jason, if you take a matchstick, the matchstick by itself is not that harmful. The matchstick right there, you light it, you can blow it out. It's just as simple as that. It can be as simple as that. In that 1 minute, that 1 second where you've lit the match, you could easily blow it out. But just like that open wound, let's say I light the matchstick, but I don't put it out. And rather than put it out, I decide to throw it in a garbage bin that's next to my desk. And there's papers in there. What happens to the papers? Well, the papers are going to get out of control. The papers are going to start catching wind of the fire. And then let's further assume I don't look after that garbage bin and I try to solve it by not putting out the fire, but instead taking that outside and throwing it in the dumpster that's outside. And now that matchstick is lit up, not just the little, like my trash bin, but now the actual dumpster is becoming a dumpster fire. And it all started from the matchstick. It all started from not looking after that matchstick by doing the right thing, by blowing it out. And it further got escalated when I didn't put it out in the trash bin and I didn't put it out when I threw it in the dumpster. And now when that dumpster fire erupts, literally erupts, is it the fault of the dumpster? No. And so it's not the fault of any of the other things leading up to it, except for that one matchstick. If left unchecked, that one trigger, it can set the I almost want to I want to call it the sheer coincidence, but in my heart I know these sequence of events, there's no way it's a simple coincidence, and there's no way that it's, I almost want to say, hapstance circumstance, because in my mind's eye, in what I know now, from what I've learned in recovery, there's more to addiction than just the alcoholic mind. There's needs, there's wants, there's desires. And if these desires and if my ego is making decisions for me, despite how my body will tell me that I'm not invincible, my ego will tell me that I am. And my ego will reassure me and tell me that I can do this, and I can just give in to these addictions. I can give in to these moments. I can hit new lows. And we haven't talked about hitting rock bottom yet, but there's points where the triggers and the triggering events, these things that I've caused, I'll get to the point where I remember being so wound up, so hypertensive, that I would almost have arguments with my friends and my family, knowing that they're going to get upset. And then I would use that as an excuse to go out and get drunk. And that's a very sad example of a person. And I look back now and I know that it's not the right thing to do. But in the moment, my ego just tells me that I can. And I'm not using my ego as an excuse, but here's a shining example of the dumpster fire, the matchstick. These are all the sequence of events that an alcoholic mind can construct. And these are the things that an ego tells you that you can do. And despite not being invincible, it's crazy how easy it is to convince myself that it is doable, that it is achievable. There's more to life than just arguments. There's more to life than just frustration, resentment, and negativity. And there's no room in my life now for it. I look back now and seeing that these triggers, they don't go away. I still have triggering moments. Like I still have things that alert me, or if I know I'm getting to that point where I'm starting to feel anxious or anxiety, I tap out. I reach out to a friend. I let them know, hey, you know what? I just want to talk right now. I just want to chat. And then I debrief and I don't hold on to it. There's no more room for resentments. There's no more room in my life to let it build to that point where that dumpster fire comes out of nowhere, because I need to put all these measures in place these 17 other steps so that I don't have to worry about that risk. I don't have to worry about that challenge. But that doesn't happen overnight. That comes from challenging myself a million times over. That comes from being able to admit that I need help. That comes from, yes, this is a triggering moment. Yes, this is an upsetting event, but I'm not going to let that rule my life. I'm not going to let that make decisions for me. I'm much more of a person now than I was before. And that means taking ownership. That means taking past beyond my ego and admitting that there is a problem, admitting that, you know what, this situation sucks. You know what, 2020 is just one big dumpster fire. But that doesn't mean that I am. It doesn't mean that the rest of the year is going to be. I can choose to put a new label on it. I can choose to take it from a new angle. But I'm not able to do that if I'm just living in my limited view. If I'm looking at it from just my one perspective. We talked about before about reframing our emotions. And some things are very frustrating and some things are very upsetting. Friends and family might lose their jobs. They might lose loved ones. There might be points where, these are loss, like genuine loss. And those are moments where loss needs to be felt and appreciated. But then there's also other moments where a triggering event and triggers can be life-threatening. And there are times where that trigger for you might not be the same trigger for me. I'm not diminishing it, but I remember being in treatment where we would have these sober, dry dances or music. We would just have live music once a month. And everyone gets together. We would have hot dogs and drink Sprite from like the red plastic cups in a gymnasium. And it was really fun. It was really exciting. But every time we had one of those events, there'd be at least one or two guys out of the 50, and they would relapse. They would just get triggered, and seeing the lights and the music and the dance, what they've associated to that moment and that anxiety was so easy for them to teeter and totter. And despite it being a safe environment to have those conversations and to being open to that, it was too much. And some of them didn't make it, and some of them left. They're still they left the program, and so you don't hear from them anymore. And I can appreciate that music and dancing is not what's triggering to me. I still have my triggers. I still have my own anxieties and my inequities. I still have my flaws. I'm still working on them. But I'm in a position now where I can identify them. I'm in a position now where I know I'm not invincible, and I know that I'm human, and I know that I've got goals and I've got accomplishments and I've got a few milestones under my belt. I'm not exactly I'm not where I don't want to say I'm not perfect, but I'm not searching for perfection. I'm just aiming for progress. And there's the difference where I don't use my goals as a measurement of my success. Because if I compare that goal to where I am now, it's easy for me to feel upset. It's easy for me to feel lacking or inequitable. That's not the right word. But I have to have a better life. I have to have a different perspective in order for me to live that better life. I'm not able to do that if I'm easily triggered. I'm not able to do that if I'm easily persuaded, if my mood is adjusted. If I drink 17 cups of coffee in a day, that's probably not the best way to start making decisions. If I'm really anxious on caffeine, if I'm feeling really low or emotional, or if I haven't connected with my friends and family for a long time and I'm feeling that little tiny bit of loneliness, that's probably not the best time to go shopping on Amazon. I shouldn't go shopping at Save on Foods or Thrifties if I'm really hungry. So these are things that I can help use to mitigate those triggers. Does that eliminate them entirely? No. I can't eliminate those entirely. But what I can do is work on where I am, with who I am, and appreciate it for the moment for what it is. So that's triggers, my friends. Thank you so much for joining me, and thanks for joining this conversation. I really appreciate that. Every day we go over something new. We've talked about ego, we talked about reframing emotions, And I want to show you something here real quick. If you're watching the live stream, we have on the screen right now, I've got sobriety.live/now. And it's a link that goes to the website. And here we have the link to the podcast. There are people who are listening to the podcast right now. There are some people who actually read the blogs. The link to the blog is here. Or if you want to watch the video version is here, where I've got the links to YouTube and Facebook. I've even got other links as well. There's a free Coursera course, and they have a whole section there on mental health. And again, it's totally free until the end of the year, I think. And there's also a calm.com, 30 days of calm.com. It's 30 days absolutely free. And I've also got a couple of links to my popular videos that I have about reaching out for help and how I became an addict. In the meantime, friends, thank you so much for hanging out. Thanks for being a part of the conversation. I really appreciate that. Today's talk was on triggers. We went a little bit deep into the examples of triggers and what can be triggering and how we can help separate how we can separate ourselves from our ego to be able to detune those triggers, or to deprogram them, or to reprogram them to something else that's much more productive. All right, my friends, you take care and you have fun, and I'll catch you in another video. Or if you're listening on the podcast, thank you.